Hello and welcome to Topic 1, Lecture 2. And in this lecture, we are going to be learning about the informal criminal justice system. All right, so what are we going to be covering in this lecture? Well, first, we're going to talk about the difference between the formal criminal justice system, which we learned about in the last lecture, and the so-called informal criminal justice system. Then we're going to take a look at the criminal justice funnel, because the criminal justice funnel is a really good illustration of how the criminal justice system is really not an assembly line. Doesn't follow the model of the formal criminal justice system, but that it is much more informal and cooperative. And then we are going to learn about the factors that contribute to the informal criminal justice system. And so we're going to be learning about the courtroom work group and the wedding cake model of justice. So that's what we've got on the docket. Let's go ahead and get started. So as we learned in the last lecture, the formal criminal justice system is really seen as this assembly line. This line where there are, clear steps in each of the stages of the criminal justice system, and that the offender goes through each of those steps, and that there are crucial decisions made at each of those steps, and the agents who work in those different steps, the police, the prosecutor, the judges, the correctional officials, that they all take their job like very seriously, that they are, law enforcement, will stop at nothing to solve a crime, that prosecutors are going to charge and take people to trial, and that nobody's really happy until the case is cleared, right? And that it's actually, put to bed. As we know, that's not how the criminal justice system, really works. Okay. That's more of a fiction that's sort of portrayed in the media. That's not to say that some high profile cases, right, some very serious murder charges or other serious cases, that's not to say that, that there isn't that sort of more of an adversarial approach to the process. But in general, the criminal justice system is a lot more informal, with cases being settled in cooperation with the main actors in the criminal justice system. And so, sure, law enforcement want to fight crime, but they also use their discretion, right, in terms of, making decisions about whether or not, based on their initial contact, whether or not they should actually, pursue an investigation or arrest somebody. As we know, and as we'll learn through the course of the semester, the prosecution and the defense are oftentimes working cooperatively to come up with a plea agreement, okay? And so, so the list goes on. And so, the criminal justice system is much more informal and much more cooperative than is seen sort of in the news media and in the entertainment media as well. So the criminal justice funnel is a really good illustration of the informal criminal justice system. Basically that there are a lot of steps along the way, but it's not an assembly line. Each offender doesn't, experience each step of the process. And this funnel, really does a good job of illustrating that. Now, what this justice funnel, where these numbers come from, okay, is that this is based on the work of criminologist Thomas Cohen and Tracy Kicklecon. And what they did is they looked at a representative sample of felonies. Okay, so this is serious crimes in 75 of the largest counties in the United States. Okay. So based on that sample, they said this is what generally happens per 1,000 serious crimes. Okay. And so let me put on the magic pen so you can kind of illustrate some of this. So of 1,000 serious crimes that are committed in the United States, half of them go unreported to the police. Okay. And so, right there, a crime is committed, but cops never even find out about that crime. Okay. So right there, we have a funneling effect. Really, it cuts it in half. Now, you might be asking yourself, how do we know if crimes are committed if they're not reported to the police? Well, in a few weeks, we're going to be learning about how we measure crime. One way of measuring crime is to ask police and law enforcement whether a crime has been reported to them. Another way of measuring crime is to ask victims of crime if they've ask people if they've been victims of crime. And so you can be a victim of crime and you're still a victim of crime even though you never reported it to the police. And that's how we know that there are people who have been victimized, but that it never got reported to the police. Of the 500 that were reported to the police, 400 are unresolved, okay? And so that's a really significant number. So again, that out of 1,000 serious felonies, 100 of the people the case is solved. 100 that you actually find and arrest the person who committed that crime, okay? Out of those 100, 65 go into the adult system and 35 go into the juvenile system. And we're not going to talk about this side of it because this isn't a class on juvenile justice, but we'll take a look at the adult side of this, okay? And so of the 65 adults who are considered for prosecution, again, we have the funneling, right? This is nolli prosequi. The prosecutor is not going to pursue. And it could very well be that they're just realizing that there's no way that they're going to win this case. They don't have enough evidence. And then of the 60, so that leaves 25 are not going to be prosecuted. Of the 40 cases that are accepted for prosecution, 10 people jump bail or abscond. And so you're left with 30. 30 cases are bound over for trial. And here we have more winnowing. 90% of people plead guilty through a plea agreement. 2 go to trial and are found guilty. And 1 who goes to trial is acquitted, right? So you have a 1 out of 3 chance, according to this, with a serious felony of getting acquitted if you go to trial. Maybe that's why a lot of people plead guilty. And so of the people found guilty, 29 are sentenced, 9 are placed on probation, and 20 are incarcerated, okay? So you start with 1,000 offenses, and at the end of the day, at least on the adult side, you've got 20 on this side, you got 5 over here on the juvenile side. So it's winnowed down quite a bit, okay? So that's just a good illustration about how it's not necessarily an assembly line. Very few go through all the steps. And we're going to talk about what are the factors that influence this funneling effect. But before we do that, let's take a quick look at and sort of think critically about this criminal justice funnel, if there are some things we might potentially be concerned about. So let's think critically about the criminal justice funnel. So when you were looking at this and learning about this, they talk about in your textbook as well. What was your reaction to it? Was it surprising to you that so few make it through all the steps? Is that something to be concerned about? And so I want you, thinking of all the places where the narrowing takes place, which for you was there any aspect of it to you that was concerning? I have to say that it's pretty shocking in terms of the low level of reporting of crimes to police, particularly of serious felonies. And so, you have to sort of ask yourself, why is that, right? And is that a sign of some sort of weakness or, some sort of a defect within our law enforcement community or our attitudes towards law enforcement? Now, a lot of serious crimes are not reported to police because of the relationship that the victim has to the person who perpetrated that crime. While they might be comfortable saying that they were a victim of rape or some sort of assault to a surveyor asking them had they been victimized, they may not feel comfortable coming forward to the police and reporting a rape or reporting an assault by somebody, a close member of their family, right? Or a friend. And so there might be legitimate reasons for why people do not report crimes to the police. However, if people aren't reporting crimes to the police because they don't trust the police, they don't think that they'll take their report seriously, if people think it's a waste of time, that the area in which you live, that you don't feel like police are going to take that investigation seriously, if you think there's actually going to be more harm associated with contacting the police than not contacting the police, those are all sort of causes for concern in terms of that funneling effect. Also, the clearance rate, that even when a crime is reported to police, only 20% of serious crimes are cleared. And what cleared means is that an offender is identified, right? The person that there is probable cause to believe that this individual committed this crime, and then they're turned over to the prosecutor's office. So that's 20%. So why is that? It could be that potentially police are arresting people without proper evidence, and then it's good that person is that there's no clearance on that. Although I guess that I kind of misspoke there. The low clearance rate is that you have a reported crime and law enforcement are doing an investigation on that. If it is that they don't have enough evidence, then that could be a problematic. That do they not have enough police officers to do a proper investigation? When a crime is reported, are people unwilling to talk to the police to give them the information that they need to do a proper investigation? Are some crimes just not prioritized within police offices or police departments? Are they just not prioritized, so they just don't get the attention that they deserve? And so the low clearance rate does seem to be sort of concerning because a crime's been reported and we can't find anybody who's responsible for it. But we have to sort of think about, well, what are the reasons for that low clearance rate? And then, the prosecutorial discretion, the noli prosequi, that there are some cases that the prosecutor doesn't pursue. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, if a prosecutor just never exercised discretion, everybody would be getting indicted, right? Everybody would be getting charged with a crime, even though there wasn't, proper evidence to, convict this person beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's probably something good about the prosecutorial discretion. However, if that prosecutorial discretion is being used in a way that is, for political reasons, or that some people, they pursue cases on some, but not others, even though the evidence is the same, that might be a cause for concern. And then, of course, that high percentage of plea bargains. On the one hand, that could be seen as concerning because particularly if people are feeling like they want to go to trial, but that they're so concerned that they will get convicted, that might be an indication that they don't feel like their defense attorney could do a good enough job. It could be because they engage in a plea bargain because a prosecutor really overcharges somebody and scares the bejesus out of them. That if you're found guilty, you're going to be sent away forever. And so you're going to plea bargain because the defendant is just scared, even though they didn't commit the crime. But it could be a positive thing, right? You could say, look, engage in a plea bargain, we will drop the charges or reduce the charges. You'll spend less time in prison. That could potentially be good in terms of an overburdened prison system. But from a victim's perspective, it may not be good because of the fact that, a very, very serious crime has, like aggravated sexual assault is being charged downward to like a simple assault that doesn't include sexual assault in it as a part of the plea bargain deal. That could be very upsetting to a victim. And so just some things to think about. We know that it funnels, but that we probably need to dig in a little bit more deeply to see whether or not that funneling is a cause for concern. So there are two major factors that contribute to the criminal justice system being more cooperative and more informal than the formal criminal justice system that's presented as the assembly line. The one is known as the courtroom work group, and the other is the wedding cake model of justice. So let's take a look at each of those. I think a lot of times when we think about what takes place in a courtroom, a movie will come to mind, right? And that, when we sort of think about what takes place in the courtroom, as I had mentioned before, the way it's portrayed in movies and television is oftentimes quite fictional. And so that oftentimes it's seen as an adversarial, that the courtroom is adversarial, that you've got this really vigorous, this is a picture from the great movie A Few Good Men, where you have this, this angry, passionate prosecutor who's going to pursue justice at all costs, raising angry fists, and a vigorous defense, and the judge sort of, being sort of this, angry sort of, goalkeeper or whatever, like umpire between the two sides, right? And so usually, in general, the courtroom is seen or considered as being adversarial, and it's commonly portrayed that way in movies like A Few Good Men. The reality is that what happens in the courtroom is oftentimes not adversarial at all. That it is a process that's often, cooperative. Defense attorneys working with the judge and the prosecutor to, get somebody through the criminal justice process sort of as streamlined and as quickly as possible. Because you have members, in a second we're going to define what the courtroom work group is, that you have this idea that the members of the work group share the common goal of getting offenders through the process as quickly as possible. And so the reality is, and particularly when you go to see and sit in on a courtroom, you're much more likely to see the courtroom work group and its cooperation in action than the sort of fictitious adversarial process that's portrayed in the movies. And so the courtroom work group is primarily composed of those who work in the courtroom day in and day out. That would include the judge, prosecutors, and the defense attorney and other court personnel who are there day in and day out. The courtroom work group shares the goals, similar goals, okay? Their main goals that they share is that you want to avoid trial at all costs, right? Trials are very costly. They take a lot of time. And so that, unless it is a really high profile or important case, a lot of times the shared goal is to let's see what we can do to make sure this doesn't go to trial. Want to remove delays, streamline this as quickly as possible. So if you have a defense attorney who's constantly, trying to delay, push off another court date, that's not going to be looked unkindly by the courtroom work group, right? That judge will look at the activities of the defense attorney and they'll be like, no, you need to get on board here, okay? We need to work more cooperatively to try to get this through as quickly as possible, particularly since there are really large caseloads within our court system. And so there are features of this work group that sort of facilitate this goal. That for one, the members of the courtroom work group, they have a lot in common. For one, they work with each other day in and day out, right? And so the judges, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, they see each other. Chances are they went to the same law school, right? If you're working in the Wisconsin circuit courts as a judge or a prosecutor or a defense attorney, chances are you went to the University of Wisconsin Law School or to Marquette, right? Not exclusively, but you might have even gone to school with some of these people. You're of the same income group. You sort of hang out potentially with the same group of people. And so you have a lot in common, right? So that it makes it sort of easier to sort of work together because, you spend a lot of time together like any other workplace, right? There's some sort of norms that are adopted. Let's get this done as quickly as possible. Another feature of it is that, that members of the work group, particularly prosecutors, maybe judges as well, that they want to work out a case that provides for professional advancement, right? And so prosecutors oftentimes see, being a prosecutor as a stepping stone to elected office or a stepping stone to a judgeship. And so they want to win cases, right? And so even though it might serve justice to not engage in a plea agreement and pursue a trial, you may not want to do that because you might not feel confident that you're going to win that case as a prosecutor, and that's not going to look good on your record, okay? And so there are features of this that sort of facilitate this goal. And then there are some, shared assumptions as well. That one of the shared assumptions is the assumption that that most of the people who end up in that courtroom, particularly for serious cases, are probably guilty. Okay, and so there's oftentimes an assumption that this person is guilty. These people spend a lot of time with people who have been accused of crimes. And so, that's one of the major assumptions that courtroom work group will at times, hold that leads to this cooperation. If you don't assume that assumption that the people that are there are likely guilty, then you're going to be more adversarial. But if you share that assumption, it's going to play out in a more cooperative way. So there are certainly benefits and drawbacks to the courtroom work group. One benefit, as I mentioned, is that with a lot of cases in our criminal justice system, the caseload is ginormous, right? And so if you were not cooperative, if you didn't share the norms of trying to reduce delays and streamline this and get it through the system as quickly as possible, there would be a huge backlog, a huger backlog than there already is. And so having some shared norms that move things quickly, at least it's good from a caseload perspective. It also, you would think that, hey, we're just getting people through as quickly as possible. Is this going to, put people behind bars that don't deserve to be bars? Or if we're going, quickly as possible and we're plea bargaining, aren't, criminals that are really dangerous getting back out on the streets? Well, research shows that the benefits of the courtroom work group, that it actually benefits those who didn't really commit very serious crimes, okay? And so that those who commit the least serious crimes are the ones who are going to benefit from the streamlining. The defense attorney and the prosecutor are more likely to do a pretrial diversion, sort of saying, if you do these things, stay sober, get job training, then then we won't take you to trial if you achieve these goals. And that it allows, since those people are sort of taken out of the system, it allows the system to focus on those who are more serious chronic offenders, because the research shows that serious chronic offenders are less likely to be sort of pushed through the system quickly. Probably the biggest drawback is that the rights of the accused are bypassed. That you might feel a lot of pressure if you're accused of a crime to waive your trial rights and to accept a plea agreement, even if you're not guilty. And so if you get a chance to sit in on a plea agreement hearing in your courtroom report that you're going to be doing later in the semester, they're pretty chilling, because a part of that plea agreement hearing is they walk the defendant through all the rights that they are waiving, right? You waive your right to an appeal because you've pled guilty, right? You've waived your right to a jury trial, right? And so there is something chilling about that streamlining and pushing people towards plea agreements, particularly if they're innocent, right? And also that this pressure to waive the rights that everybody is constitutionally afforded. So the other factor that contributes to the funneling effect and the informal criminal justice system is what is known as the criminal justice wedding cake, or the wedding cake model of criminal justice. And let me put on my fancy pen here. And so, this is a tiered cake, okay? And so like a tiered cake, you have the really long, big layer here. And as it goes up, there's less, okay? And so this basically is an illustration of just, the types of crimes that are committed in the United States. The biggest level at the bottom, level 4, are misdemeanors. Those are less serious crimes. They're non-felony crimes. Level 3 are less serious felonies. At level 2 are serious felonies, like, manslaughter and aggravated assault. And it's celebrated cases. Those are the cases that get a lot of attention from the media because of the celebrity nature of the defendant, okay? And so what the criminal justice wedding cake model is basically theorizing, and it plays itself out in the criminal justice system. We see this as being one of the norms that's adopted, or assumptions that's adopted, by the courtroom work group, is that it's the cases on the lower level that should get the least attention from the criminal justice system. It's the misdemeanors and the less serious felonies that should really be streamlined, okay? Saving time and money of those who work in the courtroom, and as default, the taxpayer, right? I mean, prosecutors, judges are all paid for by tax dollars. Courtrooms are paid for by tax dollars, and even some defense attorneys, public defenders are paid by tax dollars. And so that's always in the back of our mind, spending our money where we need to spend it, right? And spending less of it where it's less needed. And so from this modeling that, it basically says that it's the serious cases and the celebrated cases that get the most attention. Now we can understand why the serious cases because you want to keep the most dangerous people out of society. The celebrated cases, well, why are they likely to go through all the steps, right? The layer 1 and layer 2 are most likely to go through all of the steps, the assembly line, experience the formal criminal justice system. We understand that with serious felonies. Why with the celebrated cases? Well, with the celebrated cases, it could just simply be that it serves as a lesson, right? People are paying attention to it. And so that, it's an opportunity for the criminal justice system to basically show, like, with Elizabeth Holmes, the person who defrauded the investors for Theranos, her blood, or whatever that was, analyzing company, is serving a massive amount of time right now for her fraud. She was famous. She was this hot tech, I don't mean hot, like attractive. I mean, although she was attractive, but she was like the darling of Wall Street, right? And she was fraudulent, and so it gave an opportunity to sort of say, we're not going to let the tech industry get away with things, right? If they're lying about the value of their company, if they're lying about what their product can do, they're going to get punished for it. Okay, so it sort of sends a message. Those celebrated cases. And so that is, just basically sort of an overview of the criminal justice wedding cake and how it impacts the informal criminal justice system. Okay, so that's it for me for this lecture and for this week. Looking forward to next week. This week we're looking at the first half of chapter 1. Next week we'll be looking at the second half of chapter 1. And we're going to be taking a look at the 6 criminal justice perspectives. That is sort of worldviews about sort of expectations of the role that we think the criminal justice system should play in our society. And so we're going to be learning about the 6 perspectives on criminal justice. And then next week, we're going to have this really cool discussion where you take those perspectives and apply them to what we learned this week about the stages in the criminal justice process. All right. Thanks for listening. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'll talk to you again soon.